Good morning, everybody. Barry Jones, SP History, episode 2 of the New Orleans Walking Tour. Yesterday, we looked at all the Lee Harvey Oswald related sites, which are, of course, related to the JFK assassination. I took you on a tour. This is the version of the tour that I do online. Of course, if you followed me at all, you know I offer an in-person tour where we actually go to all those locations. I take you through the three clusters. We ride the trolley. We stop in the French Quarter. We eat lunch. We go to the Cafe du Monde at the end, get some beignets and chocolate milk or coffee, whichever you prefer. But we tell the story of the plot, go through an average day in the life of Lee Harvey Oswald that summer of '63 and all the people that his life intersected with. And I advertised 26 locations. I think yesterday we covered 31, 32, something like that. Basically, it's whatever we can cram in a 6 hour time period. So the longer we eat, the longer we spend eating and going to Cafe Du Monde takes a little bit of the time away from us. But anyway, today I told you in episode 2 we would be looking at the and some. As you know, if you look at my title slide, it's the three clusters and some. So today we want to look at the and some. I described my title slide, these pictures. I think nothing says New Orleans more to me anyway in my travels around New Orleans, especially on bicycle, is the ever-present uh, trolley cars. They're everywhere. And, you know, life, it just sort of goes on around them and even in their own space. I talked about yesterday how walkers and joggers go right on the tracks and they've got paths. You can see the path right there in the middle. That's where the walkers and the joggers go. And they just step aside and let the train go by. You really got to watch. I found myself a couple times, you know, everything's a boulevard in New Orleans where these trolleys are. And so you have to do a lot of U-turns. You better have your head on a swivel when you pull your truck into one of those cross drives to do a U-turn because you might be in the path of an oncoming trolley. And there's zip, 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 they're everywhere. And these trolleys, it's not just for tourists. The New Orleans people depend on them. These things are full. You know, when they go by, except on weekends, like on a Sunday, it's not. But Monday through Friday, these things are full. And so, and then the other thing is that pasta jambalaya, boy, it's good. The Creole version. The Cajun version is not bad either, but the Creole version is to die for. So if you ever get a chance, the meats in that, sausage, shrimp, and chicken, and then you add the pasta to it and that Creole seasoning. Oh my goodness, fantastic. All right, so today I've done another map. I don't know if those maps were helpful yesterday, but we stayed in a campground, a KOA campground where this red star is. If you see my cursor, that was our location. And so we're right on the river. I mean, literally right on the river. You look across the street and there's the levee. And kind of an eerie feeling to watch ships go by and you're looking up at the ships because they're in water that's above the level of the ground you're standing on. The only thing between you and being flooded out is that levee. So everything in this section is going to be in relation to this KOA. It's Jefferson Parish, as you know. Louisiana is divided by parishes, not by counties. And Jefferson Parish is home to a lot of interesting things, including some JFK related items we'll get to. Jefferson Highway runs pretty much parallel to the river, so it does some curving and stuff. It takes you down, turns into Claiborne. Claiborne takes you right downtown. And so, boy, what a convenience it was for us. We just hop in the truck if we were going downtown, just take Jefferson to Claiborne, Claiborne right downtown. And we usually went on Sundays where there's free parking downtown and park anywhere. And you know, it's, you don't have any of the business related traffic. It's really pleasant, actually. You go down there during the week, you get kind of hectic. But so when I went down during the week, I always rode my bike, so I didn't have to find a parking space. So anyway, first thing I wanted to I've got them numbered. This is my legend. 33 is the river, obviously, so we'll be talking about the river, the levees. 34, if you jump up, is Lake Pontchartrain. Now, what is interesting to me, first of all, Lake Pontchartrain is an enormous lake. I grew up on the Great Lakes. It's not as big as the Great Lakes, but it's big and it's shallow. It's like almost like a bird bath in the fact that it's so shallow. I think the deepest spot is 14 feet. So you don't see big ships out there. You'd think you'd see big ships or oil rigs or something. You don't see any of that. You see a causeway, it goes across. We'll look at the causeway, and it's the longest bridge in the world. You know, it's I think 20 or 34. It's right around 30 miles each way. I don't remember the exact mileage, but it's very long. It's the longest bridge in the world, and or in North America. It's the longest bridge in North America. I think China has a bridge that's longer. Anyway, it's built, you'll see it. The way it's constructed, it looks like a bridge you'd see going across a river here, on an interstate somewhere because it's so shallow. They just drove pylons into the bottom and they didn't have to construct this monstrous uh, bridge, this, suspension bridge, and they didn't have to make it high because there's no big ships on it. So it's a causeway, but it's very, very long. And when you're out in the middle of it, you look around, you don't see shoreline on any of the four sides. You think you're in the middle of the ocean on this bridge. It's pretty unnerving a little bit. But on the Lake Pontchartrain side on the New Orleans side of Lake Pontchartrain, you get these massive levees. They're actually higher than the Mississippi River levees. And we'll talk about those are the levees that gave way. You know, New Orleans is below sea level, and on one side you got the river, which is higher than the shoreline, which is why you have the levee. Then on the other side you have Lake Pontchartrain, which is again higher than the city, which is why you have these high levees. And then you have the Gulf of Mexico. If a hurricane it ever hits New Orleans Square, like Hurricane Katrina did. It's the perfect storm. It floods Pontchartrain. The rains and the swells flood Pontchartrain. Pontchartrain overfills its banks, breaks down the levee, and floods Orleans Parish, Jefferson Parish, and then it gets trapped in by the levee on the Mississippi River side. So it turns into like a dish bowl, and and then you got these pumps. They're supposed to pump all that water out. Problem is, if the level of the water where the body of water where the pump the water to is higher, and it's hard to pump that water into it. You're just making it higher and higher, creating problems on the other side. It's a logistical nightmare in New Orleans trying to handle water. Everywhere you look, there's pumps, there's levees, uh, there's these enormous troughs, look like ditches, but they're concrete, and it's to handle all the water and route it in certain directions, et cetera, et cetera. We'll go through it. I'll show you. You can't drive anywhere. You can't ride your bike anywhere. You can't walk anywhere in New Orleans or the surrounding area and not be inundated with all these different strategies and tactics to handle water. It is the number one all-consuming uh, endeavor I would imagine, for the city of New Orleans with respect to its government. How do we handle water? We got a couple rainstorms uh, in the month and a half that we were there, and just a simple rainstorm creates water where you're at. Our campsite had three drains in it, in and around it, and if those drains are not properly not working properly, the water almost immediately, because the water table in the ground is so high, it doesn't absorb. It just it just puddles up, pools up, and next thing you know, your camper's underwater. So we saw several campers that were underwater, and they were out there trying to fix the drains. And that was just a simple rainstorm. It's always an issue. Always an issue. We'll get into that. 35 is the Huey Long Bridge. At one time, it was the longest. There's a highway bridge, and then on top of it is the railroad truss, and it goes across, and it's kind of all been molded into the same bridge. And at one time, that was the longest railroad truss in the world. So you got the Lake Pontchartrain Bridge, which is the longest bridge over open water. In North America, you had what used to be the longest railroad truss, UEP Long Bridge, and it goes and goes and goes. And trains are a big deal in New Orleans, not just ships going up down the Mississippi or ships coming in the Gulf. Lots of trains, lots and lots of trains. 36 is Ochsner Hospital, and we'll get into all the things that are related to Ochsner. And I sort of mentioned it in episode one. It's a pretty impressive empire he created. Charity Hospital downtown, 37. You just stay on Jefferson, it turns into Claiborne, just keep going. It pretty much dead ends into Charity Hospital. Charity Hospital is the hospital that one of the hospitals, there's a couple actually in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, were abandoned. And it's still sitting down there, this hulking uh, structure that's fallen into a state of disrepair. And, hobos and homeless people are living in it. They got fences around it, graffiti everywhere. It's amazing. It's a ghost hospital. And, that's the hospital Lee Harvey Oswald was built in, or was born in. That's the hospital Ochsner got his start in until he ran into a conflict with the governor, Huey Long. So it's a pretty prominent hospital, and it's sitting there empty now. They're having all kinds of fights uh, to, to decide what to do with it. Uh, it's sort of an eyesore. Anyway, we'll look at Charity Hospital. 38 going back outside on the far left. You see 38. I ran out of space. I just threw it in there. That's the Destrin plantation. Um, it's right along the river, right along the levee. So I took some pictures of that. 39 Lafayette Cemetery number one. Uh, that's another thing. Because of the high water table, you can't bury people in the traditional way that we do up in the Midwest or wherever else. And so all the graveyards you've probably seen are above ground. And it's a spooky sight. And they've got them scattered all over the place. And so this one in particular, right downtown, right in the Garden District, which is kind of the exclusive, it's where all the elites in New Orleans live. They've got this Lafayette Cemetery number one. And so we'll look at that. Then number 40, back in Metairie, which is a little town inside Jefferson Parish, it was about 5 minutes from our campground, is Carlos Marcello's home. And we looked at Carlos Marcello's 500 Club in episode one. This is his home. And at the time, in 1963, this was basically at the end of a long road in the middle of a swamp. Now it's a big subdivision with a golf course around it. But you didn't want to be summoned to meet Carlos Marcello at his home. Uh, Hard telling how many bodies were buried in that swamp on either side of that lonely road leading out to his house, his perfect hiding space. You bury somebody in that swamp, you never see their body again. And so if you got summoned to Carlos Marcello's home, chances are it was not going to go well for you. Right around the corner from his home was the little motel. It was called Town and Country or something, but it was a little motel. It's no longer there, so I don't have it on. There's nothing to picture. There's just a parking lot now, but that's where he ran his enterprise out of. This little hotel and had a restaurant attached to it, and he had a little office. And above his head, back of his head on the wall, he had a sign: "Three people can keep a secret as long as two of them are dead." Was sort of the motto that he lived by. So Metairie in Jefferson Parish was home to Carlos Marcello, who was the godfather of New Orleans. Nothing happened in New Orleans without his say-so. 41 and 42 are right across the street from Audubon Park. That's Loyola and Tulane. Beautiful campuses. And of course, they look out at Audubon, which is in itself beautiful. 43 downtown is Cafe Du Monde, famous spot for beignets, right there on the edge of the French Quarter. 44, 45, and 46, I don't have numbered on the map because they're all over the place. I'm going to show you some of the water pumps, the pipelines scattered around the city of New Orleans, the trains, the planes. You can see where our campsite was. We were right next to the Louis Armstrong International Airport. And planes were constantly landing and taking off, landing and taking off. We it was pretty constant. Now it's nothing compared to Dallas. When we were in Dallas, I've never seen anything like it. Uh, at any given time, you look up into the sky, there are 8 planes circling, waiting to land. I mean, literally waiting their turn to land in one direction. In the other direction, there's 8 more planes that just took off. It's just, it's a, my goodness, it's like a Los Angeles freeway in the sky. Anyway, it's still pretty busy here in New Orleans. So we'll talk about the trains and the planes. Also, right behind us was a pretty important railroad track. It's not pictured on this map. This is a map that I chose particularly because I could blow it up, but it's not accurate as far as the railroad tracks. That railroad track that ran right behind our campsite literally ran right above the star in the number 33. And it was an active track. I haven't been around on a track that active in a long time. Had, I think, 4 or 5 sets of tracks, and trains you were constantly getting stopped. If you were going in the direction of Lake Pontchartrain from our campsite, you were going to get stopped by a train. It was a surprise if you didn't get stopped. Trains constantly. And these are 100, 150, some of them had 200 cars on them. These are long trains. And because they're entering the cosmopolitan area of New Orleans, they're not going very fast. See, it was a long wait. uh, and then 46, we'll talk about the rhythm and blues, jazz, gospel, zydeco, all these music influences that came from New Orleans. We'll hit on a couple of them, but you can't talk about New Orleans and not talk about music. It is everywhere, especially you go down the French Quarter. Every establishment has some sort of live music. Uh, they're on the corners. There's music festivals at the parks downtown, Lafayette Square, the park downtown by right across the street from Cafe Du Monde. Constant music festivals. The music is ever present, and of course we know New Orleans was sort of the birthplace of the blues, which became the rhythm and blues, which later became rock and roll music. Went up the river to Memphis, and the rest is history. It had its start in New Orleans. All right, so here's the river. These pictures I took right from front of our campsite on the levee. I'm standing on the levee, and any given time you go out, and there's these monster ships going back and forth, back and forth. Uh, Tugboats all the time pushing barges. When we left, the river banks on both sides were completely full. What they do is they park these barges that are loaded along the riverbanks, and that becomes like holding areas or parking lots for barges. And they just stack up, stack up, stack up. And these tugs are just running constantly, 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 coming back and forth, getting a new set of barges taken off with them. And that's their job. And they were pretty far behind when we left. When we arrived, you could see a lot of the riverbank. As you can see here, when we left, most of these riverbanks were full of barges. So you got a lot of river traffic, and it's going both ways. You get the incoming from the Gulf coming into New Orleans to either drop off or pick up, and then they're heading north up into the Midwest. And then you got the ones that are coming out of the Midwest through New Orleans, the gatekeeper, out into the Gulf. So it's just busy, busy, busy. And in the evenings, it's kind of interesting. I don't know if this is intentional. I'm sure it's intentional because it was every evening. During the course of the day, these ships would be moving, 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 and you'd see one at a time. At least they'd be single file, one at a time. But in the evenings, oftentimes they would park and just stay there till the next morning and take off again. And they'd stack up on top of each other, and you could look out and see 10, 12 big ships waiting to take off again. I don't know if they don't like to sail in the evenings or overnight in the darkness. I don't know. But if you wanted to see a lot of ships congregated, sort of parked, you can see they're spaced out evenly. But this was pretty much a nightly scene to go down to the levee and look at all the ships that have come through and are preparing. Now, in this particular picture, they're heading north, and the city is on the opposite direction, which would be going south. So these are ships heading north. You can see there on the riverbanks, the Mississippi River is a industrial area. It's not, it's not built up with a lot of parks and things where you can walk leisurely, take leisurely strolls along the river. These are industrial areas, a lot of pipes lying around. You got barge companies, you got all kinds of, uh, limestone or gravel or whatever. There's this every as you're walking or riding along the levee and you're looking out towards the river, between you and the river is pretty much nonstop unless it's in a flood in a area that's flooded. It's even those areas. Sometimes, like there's a company right across from us that stored all kinds of like earth moving equipment. And several days after some hard rains, the whole area was underwater. All their equipment was underwater, their buildings were under everything. And life just goes on. They just work along amongst the water. And I'm telling you, standing up on that levee, you can see down into the water and you can see what's in that water. I saw gators, I saw snakes, and these guys are just working amongst it. Doesn't even phase them. We had a guy come out working on our RV one time. He's local. Had a real, he's a Cajun, which means his family moved down from Canada. That's how there's Cajuns and Creoles. Creoles were the originals here. They have a French heritage, and the Cajuns were relocated down here from Canada. That's his family background, but it's been here several generations, and he's got a very strong accent. Speaks fluent French. Anyway, he came out, old timer, and he was telling me growing up, they lived right near on the levee, and they used to swim in the water all the time. So what about the gators? He says, we didn't have gators when I was a kid. That's sort of a late development. That's happened since I grew up. He said, but you had to watch out for snakes. Like, but they didn't seem to mind. They'd swim in amongst the snakes. He said the biggest danger was the current. He shared a story with how he and a friend of his built a raft, kind of like Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn, and they got out there and they were trying to stay on the sides out of the main current, but again, they got swept up. And it had been for a barge captain rescuing them about 3 miles downstream. He says, we might still be on that raft. He says, we couldn't stop it. It's a very swift current. Uh, Here's some more. You can see how big these ships are and these loading platforms. There's huge oil refineries up and down this river. You get, especially as you go north of Jefferson Parish, a little bit up into St. Charles Parish, the oil refineries there's one there owned by Shell. It's just enormous. I mean, as far as the eye can see, these big oil drums and ships lined up to load. And I found a little eatery down in St. Charles Parish called Frost Stop. If anyone's ever down there, it's a little town called Destran. It's where that plantation is. A little place called Frost Stop. They make their own root beer. And boy, it was a great place. And I go there for lunch, and all these oil workers would come in. They're all dressed in their uniforms and stuff. And I was laughing about it. I invited my wife to come with me one day, and she said, well, what's on the menu? And I start telling her. She's like, oh, I'm not really interested in any of that food. That sounds like guy food. And I said, well, yeah, you're probably right. Most of the people in there are guys. So the next time I went in there, I did an unofficial poll survey and I counted heads. There were 37 people in the establishment, 11 behind the counter, which are all guys, and the other 26 were all guys as well, including myself. So she was right. Yeah, that was not a place for females to go, I guess. A couple more pictures. This one on the top right is the spillway. Look how big that ship is on the left. I mean, it's just enormous. I'm on the levee there, and you know, the other thing that you see in the picture on the right, New Orleans, way in the background, and the other thing you see as you go up and down these riverbanks is cranes. The presence of cranes. They're everywhere. That's what they load with. And so every company has 5 or 6 cranes loading these ships. And so you start adding up all these cranes, you'd be there a long time. This picture on the right is the spillway at the very end of the levee trail. I couldn't go any further. It dead ends into the spillway, which is a sort of a water control effort. It's surrounded by high walls and stuff, and it creates this huge lake. It's like a reservoir. And the ships oftentimes will congregate in that reservoir, in that spillway, before traveling on the next day on their journey. So if you go down there in the evening, just like you saw in the river, where I showed you the ships stacked on top of each other, same thing in that spillway. So it must be fairly deep, fairly deep. Here are some of the levees, and I wanted to show you, first of all, top left, you follow my cursor here, all that green, that's a levee. And it just runs along the river, but on the opposite side, which is the side we were on, you have the same thing because that river, is higher than the city of New Orleans. You look on the right here where my cursor is, that's what the levee looks like. And you can see right to the left, that's your housing areas. And if you get up here where my cursor is on this path and you're riding along, you're looking down at the roofs of these houses. They're much lower on your left than the river is on your right. So you can see why if they ever had a breach, one of these levees, all of this area here would be underwater, completely underwater. Bottom left here is a picture of the levee and the trail. I took this on my bike, and you can see the Huey Long Bridge. The lower portion is the portion for cars. That's the bridge that, and then the higher portion, you see the railroad truss. It's, and then if you look at it from a distance here, bottom right, that's what it looks like. So, as I said, at one time it was the longest railroad truss bridge in the world. And it goes right over that levee. So, as you go back and forth into, in our case, into New Orleans from Jefferson Parish, you're going underneath that Huey Long Bridge every time. And it is a monstrous bridge. On the other side is the Lake Pontchartrain. And again, you got these levees. And again, it's covered at the top with a walking path or a bike riding, in this case, more of a bike riding path. And you can see both these levees, either on the Mississippi River side or Lake Pontchartrain, are out in the open sun. There's no Audubon trees, no live oak trees that are shady. So you had to pick and choose your times of day and days period when you're going to go and ride on these levees because you're out in the baking sun. And so levees are what keep the city dry relatively. Here's the Lake Pontchartrain map levee. You can see it's the red. So you get these levees, and each one of these little inlets here are little canals, and they usually have pumping stations and stuff. And there's another canal. But they have to build these levees around every little body of water. So you can see it comes in, follows the intercoastal waterway. It has another levee here protecting this section, for example, is completely surrounded by levee, completely because it's surrounded by water. And on this right, on this blue stripe, that's wetlands. So they have to, they have to levee that off too, or they'll get flooded by the wetlands. Where the problem happened for the Hurricane Katrina was all of the pink area flooded because these levees gave. This is Jefferson Parish. So, and you can see here's the river over here. That water came clear across all this land from Lake Pontchartrain, flooded all the way to the Mississippi River and all the way down here into the lower Ninth Ward. And of course, the wetlands couldn't absorb it. And so all of this pink area was underwater as a result of Hurricane Katrina. And all of these stars are levee breaks, breaches in the levee. So you have one here, you have two, three here, all of these levee breaks here. Look at all the levee breaks along the wetlands here on the intercoastal waterway. You even had some breaks on this side over here. It was just cataclysmic, the levee breaks and all that water. So that's the million-dollar question. If you don't live in New Orleans, you think, oh, it's the hurricane coming in from the Gulf that flooded everything. Well, technically, I guess you could say that's true. Wouldn't have happened without the hurricane. But specifically, what flooded and caused all the problems was Lake Pontchartrain. And it's so shallow as I said, it's like a bird bath and it's very volatile. You can whip it up in no time. And so it's a real threat when they have high winds, when they have any sort of storms come through. And when those levees breached, the water flowed down into Jefferson Parish, Orleans Parish, some of the St. Charles Parish, and just flooded everything. And then it didn't have anywhere to go because the Mississippi River levees on the back end of it acted as a like a almost like a sink or a bathtub, and it kept it in. It acted like a boundary, and so and then the pumps failed. In a case like that, okay, you're going to be full of water for a little bit. The water's trapped in by levees on all. The levees keep the water out until they don't, and then when the water breaches, now the levees work against you and they keep the water in. And that's what the pumps are for. But if the pumps fail, now you're screwed because now you're dependent on sunlight. It reminds me of living in Tennessee when it snows. There's no snow removal equipment in Tennessee and everything's hilly. So it shuts everything down because there's nobody out plowing. There's no salt trucks. You grow up in the north, that's a common scene, right? And they can handle lots of snow. You can't handle lots of snow in Tennessee. It shuts school down for weeks at a time. They wait on the sunlight. And of course, if it's these hills back in the hollers, the roads are covered by trees. It doesn't get any sunlight, so it doesn't melt. It doesn't melt. It doesn't melt. It doesn't melt. You can't go up these steep hills with a car. You can't go down. So it just shuts everything down. That, in a relative sense, is New Orleans when it comes to water. If the pumps fail, you're just depending on Mother Nature to drain. And here's the causeway I was talking about. It just goes on and on. So you get out there in that causeway, and you can see it's just built on these stilts because it's so shallow. Upper right-hand picture shows where my cursor is. That's the route. So it goes across pretty much the widest section of the lake. And you can see that aerial shot, how close, there's the river, Mississippi River beneath it, and here's Pontchartrain. You can see what Pontchartrain would do to all this area. This is all New Orleans right in here. If it ever floods, it's catastrophic. That is a huge body of water. Anyway, this is the causeway. They have turnoffs. If you make a mistake and you get on this causeway and you're, oh my God, I gotta go 35 miles. I can't turn around. They do periodically have crossovers where you can do a U-turn, turn around if you need to. I think they're like every 5 miles or so, but it's a little bit of an eerie feeling to be out on that causeway, going across that big body of water and not see land on any of the four sides. All right, here's the Huey Long Bridge. Aerial view, you can see just how long this is. And what's interesting is the railroad truss. That's what gets my attention because it's the first thing you notice about as you're approaching it. If you see where my cursor is, that's the raised portion on the west side of the river. And then over here is the raised portion on the east side of the river. And you can see here on this picture on the right how this is it again on the west side as it merges where the railroad comes in high, the roadway comes in low, but they merge and go across the river at the same height. And then when they get across the river, the roadway drops down to ground level again, and the truss for the railroad stays high for a good long period of time because it's going around to meet a raised portion of the ground where it's going to continue on. So instead of going down and up, they just keep it all at the high point, and they keep it at that level. It just makes for this extremely long, extremely high railroad truss. We used to joke, Trina and I, as we were going underneath these underpasses. You look up, you see this, pretty much all the time there was a train on it. It's going across, and it's, I don't know, seemed like 100 feet in the air. You're like, boy, if that thing ever derailed, can you imagine the mess it would cause these falling train cars? So anyway, that's the Huey P. Long Bridge. All right, all things Ochsner, Dr. Alton Ochsner. I did a whole series on the Medical Manhattan Project. We talked about all things Ochsner. I'm going to do a series on him specifically your upcoming. I really want to learn about him in particular because you can't go anywhere in New Orleans and not see something related to Ochsner. This is his hospital. It's been added on to and added on to and added on to. I don't know how many times you can vaguely make out the original hospital, which my cursor, this right here is the original hospital. It's an old white brick and it's dated, but they've surrounded it with all this new construction, which is all white brick and glass. And so basically, the old white brick is the old part of the hospital. Anything with all the glass in it is the new part of the hospital. And it's pretty impressive. It also is right on the levee. It's also in Jefferson Parish. It's also right on Jefferson Highway. So if we were driving into New Orleans on Jefferson Highway, we'd go by the front of it. If we were riding into New Orleans on our bikes, we'd go by the back of it. It's right smack in between the levee and the highway. And there's construction all around the hospital. They're building a brand new children's hospital. They already have a children's hospital. They're building a new one. They have this enormous cancer center, which is what he was known for. Uh, this, these two pictures on the right, these two bottom pictures, one of my cursors on, those are both the cancer center. Here at the top is the new, what's going to be the new children's center. It takes up about 6 city blocks. As you can see, they've got it fenced off here. Where they're going to be doing the new construction. Ochsner, they've got the cancer center, they've got sports medicine. He's got a college of medicine that's affiliated with different universities, local and those that aren't local. He's got a children's hospital. He handles all the sports medicine, or Ochsner handles all the sports medicine for the NBA Pelican team and also the NFL Saints team. By the way, headquarters for the New Orleans Saints, their practice facility, etc., and also the New Orleans Pelicans, right there in Jefferson Parish, right next to I want to say it was Lafayette Park, but I don't think that's the name of it. It was a park we walked in 100 times, about 5 minutes from where we stayed. So that's the headquarters. That was kind of interesting. So that's Ochsner. And I'll just quick mention this, but they got all the urgent cares. I mean, anything that is health related, they have workout facilities, nutrition facility, anything health related is going to have the name Ochsner on it. And of course, it's interesting, Dr. Alton Ochsner was working at Charity Hospital. I'm about ready to show you Charity Hospital here in a minute. And he got into this turf battle with the governor, Huey Long. And Huey Long had him fired from Charity Hospital. It was a government-run hospital. And thought no one in the state of Louisiana dared take on Huey Long, but Alton Ochsner did. And he was one of the few that lived to talk about it. He went on to found the Ochsner Clinic, which became the Ochsner Hospital. And I've always wondered how, he was just a young doctor at the time. How in the world, he was a surgeon, and he especially was cancer. How in the world he managed to take on with the dominant political dynasty in the state of Louisiana? It wasn't just Huey Long. There were a bunch of Longs, Russell Long, his wife, couple sons. Anyway, how did he manage to take him on head on and win? Most people who took on Huey Long in those days lost and lost big, but he didn't. He was one of the exceptions. And what I've grown to learn or come to learn is that wasn't by accident. He was strategic in the CIA's fight against the spread of communism in Latin America. He was a virulent anti-communist, anti-socialist. He was useful to the government in its efforts to counteract Huey Long, who was an avowed socialist. He happened to be in the same state and demonstrated no fear of Huey Long, so he was useful. He was also useful since all the Latin American trade comes in through the port of New Orleans. He was also useful to the CIA in its efforts to prevent communism spreading in New Orleans. He started a radio program, a newspaper, a magazine, anti-communist periodical. He was affiliated with all these other anti-communists like H.L. Hunt, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, he became very useful to the government, to the CIA, in its efforts to stop the spread of communism, especially because he was located in New Orleans. He was their man in New Orleans. And then because of his specialty, cancer, he became very useful when they discovered after the polio vaccine that they had given SV40 to 200 million Americans, maybe up to 300 million Americans, that there was going to be a cancer outbreak in about 30 years. So they needed somebody in that area of specialty to come up with a vaccine to have it ready. So they gave him that assignment. And then the CIA said, well, if it's got SV40 in it, could we not weaponize it, turn it into a bioweapon and use it as a tool of assassination, kill people in 28 days? So simultaneously, he was working on a vaccine and also a bioweapon using the same product, basically. So he was uniquely qualified to be strategic to the government's purposes in its efforts to stop the spread of communism, but also to develop a vaccine for cancer and a bioweapon out of cancer. And his location in New Orleans just made him perfect. He wasn't the only one. There were other doctors involved in these projects as well. But he was the New Orleans version, so that he was protected, is my point. And he could go over Huey Long's head. Huey Long was important in the state of Louisiana. Alton Ochsner was important to the United States of America. So he was no doubt provided with a lot of seed money to start these clinics and all this branch out and all these other endeavors. And now he has an empire. The Ochsner name is, you don't see much. Uh, well, I mean, there's the bridge, but, and you see Huey Long's name and his influence still in and around Louisiana, but Ochsner's double, triple, quadruple it. So in that head-to-head confrontation between Ochsner and Huey Long usually won. In this case, he lost. Ochsner won. So we'll get into a study of him in particular later. This is that hospital I was telling you about, the Ghost Hospital, Charity Hospital. This is where Ochsner started. This is what they call him the bully of the bullpen. He would get these young students from Tulane or whatever medical college down and put them down in this amphitheater area where they're performing these surgeries, and he would scream at them, try to create pressure situations. This was Ochsner's teaching technique. Scream at his pupils, make them nervous so they can perform under pressure. It kind of tells you a little bit about this Ochsner character. Anyway, this hospital was ravaged. All the power went out pretty quickly when it was flooded during Hurricane Katrina. A bunch of people died. They closed the hospital, and now it's just sitting there going to the weeds. And people have broken in, and you can get on YouTube, you can get on and see people who have gotten inside Charity Hospital, gone up and down the hallways, gotten down to the bowels of the hospital, and taking videos of everything that they see. It's like, it kind of reminds me of what it must have been like in Pompeii or something when the volcano came in, just froze everything in time. Everybody died, became this ghost city covered under ash. The only difference here, nothing's covered under ash. It was covered under water, but the water eventually went away. And then you can see what's left behind. They just left everything. Literally, office desks with paper still sitting on the desk. Uh, this is the Destrehan plantation. It was right down the levee path from me where we stayed. This is in the St. Charles Parish. This is right around the corner from the Frost Stop root beer stand. Anyway, this picture on the left and the middle both face out towards the levee, towards the Mississippi River. At one time, before the levee was there, faced the Mississippi River. You can't see the river because the levee's out of the way, but it's right on the other side. It's a beautiful plantation. Of course, it has a slave quarters around back, and there are tours and stuff you can go, and it's very well manicured. They've taken good care of it. It's what you expect to see in an old antebellum southern plantation. Lafayette Cemetery, number one, is downtown Garden District. Now, these are the best photos I could get because the thing was locked. You couldn't get in. So I'm reaching across with my phone, trying to take pictures, hoping to God I didn't drop my phone. But you can see all the mausoleums. It's all raised. And this cemetery, they've got these scattered. Everything's very old, very old. And some of these mausoleums are falling apart. They're in very bad condition. You wonder how they even contain any remains anymore. They've withstood a lot of floods, a lot of storms and things. And I don't know if anybody takes care of them. Somebody mows the grass and trims, I guess. But the mausoleums pretty much uh, are just as is. Um, this is the another view. This was along the street. You can see the wall. A lot of walls. Another thing I noticed about New Orleans, everything's walled off. Even people's neighborhoods, their yards. They give them, the properties are small. And so they built these massive walls around their properties so they can have courtyards, have some privacy. But they're not fences. Like you go up north and everything's fenced. It looks like a gulag. Everywhere you go, everything's fenced in, and these wooden fences. My pet peeve. A wooden fence looks nice for about a year, and then it starts to fade. Paint starts to crack. Next thing you know, it leans, and and it just looks decrepit pretty quick. And the plastic fences are even worse. I can't stand those plastic fences. Well, there is no such thing as a plastic fence in New Orleans or a wooden fence. The humidity would rot the wood in a day and a half. Everything's made out of plaster and concrete, brick, mortar. I mean, they're there to stay. So you see these walls have been there a long time. I showed you walls yesterday, the brick around the infectious disease labs, 10 feet high, right? These are 10 feet high as well. You can't see over them. And I was able to get pictures. Looks like I'm standing inside. I'm not, but I was reaching across the wrought iron gate or through the wrought iron, and I was taking pictures with my phone. So, all right, Carlos Marcello's home. This is 577 Woodvine Avenue. This is in Jefferson Parish, right around the corner from where we were staying. And it looks, if you see old pictures of it, it looks similar to this, but it's obviously been modernized. And the area around it is now very domesticated. You can see the streets and stuff leading to it. This used to be all swamp. And this is where Carlos Marcello, the godfather of New Orleans, the guy most people believe had a huge hand in the assassination of JFK. This is where he lived. And he ran New Orleans. Jack Ruby, when he bought Showgirls, came to New Orleans and negotiated with Carlos Marcello at the 500 Club. This is Loyola University right across the street from Audubon. So if you're standing on the front of Audubon, you look across, this is what you see. Well, and to the left, you see Tulane. I've never seen two colleges side by side like this, but they're side by now. Tulane is a much larger school. You get on Audubon Boulevard and you just go and you go and you go, and the campus just goes and goes and goes, butts up against Claiborne, which again is Jefferson Highway. And so it's it's a very beautiful campus. So is Loyola. It's just much smaller. It's a smaller school. But what's interesting is both these places are teeming with obviously students, and right across the street is Audubon. So a lot of them just migrate over across the street to Audubon on their breaks, and they walk or they sit in the grass and they do their studying there. It really gives Audubon Park a youthful vitality. You go to some parks in some towns, all these old farts walking around. And they got canes and stuff, and it has a real, I don't know, the dynamic is old. It's got this culture of all these ancient people tottering around. That's not the case at Audubon. Because of these universities, most of the clientele, either at Audubon's on the walking path or in the golf course area, fishing, it's mostly young people. So it's got a really youthful dynamic to it. And of course, in between, St. Charles is the street that Audubon butts up to on one side and both these universities. So right in between is the St. Charles trolleys running up back and forth, back and forth. And it's a boulevard. It's just a beautiful area. And it's all covered by these live oaks. that are everywhere. I showed you pictures of those yesterday. By the way, on the other side of Audubon is Magazine Street. We talked about that yesterday and how accessible it was to Lee Harvey Oswald and Judith Berry because they take that Magazine Street bus back and forth. So if you access Audubon from the west, you're using Magazine Street and the buses. If you access Audubon or these universities from the east, you're using St. Charles and the trolleys. So they've made it so that people can get places through this public transportation system. All right, this is Cafe Du Monde. This is my wife's favorite place. It's right on the edge of the French Quarter, so it's real convenient. You can go eat lunch at the French Quarter and just saunter over to Cafe Du Monde, and all they serve are these beignets and coffee, and in my case, chocolate milk. And we had beignets several different places, and they were good, but none of them were as good as Cafe Du Monde. And they usually have outside, what they'll do is inside the fenced in area, that's where everybody sits. Then they have live music that comes in, sets up outside that area, and so it's a real it's kind of a unique experience, a unique New Orleans experience. But trust me, if you have a choice, sit underneath the canopy because it's hot. The sun is hot. All right, I told you I'd talk about the water pumps and the pipelines. So here's a map, and you can see there's several different things. These, if you look at the legend here, the light blue solid lines, all of this stuff, this looks like a grid. These are open and underground channels. All right, so if they're underground, you don't see them, but you kind of do because the pipes always end up coming above ground. You see the end result, you see the pipes, so you know there's a channel underneath you. But the open channels are there for everybody to see. They're huge. Then you have the pipelines, which are all these dots. And the reason you know about these pipelines is because eventually they all come to surface. And so you'll be walking along, and all of a sudden, out of the ground next to you is this huge pipe, the end of it, and it's connecting to some pumping system somewhere. And a pipe just seemingly came out of the ground. So you know there's an underground pipeline. The natural channels and the drains are these very light blue. So kind of they seem to be there's not as many of them. These are the ones that empty into mostly the wetlands, trying to stream off excess water into the wetlands. And then you have the man-made waterways, which are these darker areas, these darker lines, right? And then you have pumping stations. Everywhere you look, pumping stations. So you have them along like Pontchartrain, but you have them internally too, because if catastrophe hits and these levees fail, all of this area is going to be affected by water. And so you got to have it all pumped out, and you're not going to pump it. If it floods from Pontchartrain, you're not going to pump it back into Pontchartrain. That doesn't make any sense. You're going to pump it into the river. Rivers flow, and it'll eventually go downstream. So almost when you go along this levee on the Mississippi River, you see the end result of all these pumping stations. All these pipes are outletting into the river, and that's where they're trying to route the water away from the city and away from Lake Pontchartrain. So you see, that is, think about a city up in, like Indianapolis, Indiana, for example. You don't have any of this water issue. So you have water mains that bring water to people's houses and stuff. And you have drains for the occasional hard rain, but nothing like this. This is why the streets in New Orleans are in terrible shape because they're dealing with water issues constantly. So you got sinkholes, you got, I mean, it's just amazing. The streets. If you have to drive, even on St. Charles Boulevard, which is this wide boulevard, looks like you should go 50 or 60 down. You can't. You'll tear up the suspension of your vehicle. The roads are so bad because of the water issues. Here's some example of these pipes, pumping stations I've been telling you about. They're everywhere, and these pipes are enormous. I'm 6'5". I think I can walk in some of these things. upright, you know. Uh, Bottom right is one of these pump house stations inside. You can see how big, and these engines just run these pumps constantly, even when it looks dry. You haven't had rain, you don't have any hurricanes in it. These things are still running because there's so much water. Uh, it just on a normal occurring day, they're dealing with water. So these things are almost always running. Here's a pump house, top right. These are these are pipes that are pumping the water out or sucking the water in. You can tell the ones that are pulling the water in because they have these grates around to keep from sucking in big tree branches and alligators, whatever. And then as you're walking along or riding along the levee, bottom left, you see these pipes that come out of the ground, go up over the levee, and sometimes you ride your bike right underneath them. Like in this case, it's there's an underpass there where you go underneath that as the water goes above your head, pumping it out. It's just amazing. The other thing I told you about trains and planes. I told you about the airport. I've circled in red. So you see the far left. There's the airport. There's the red star. That's where we were staying. And I told you there was a train track that went right above us. That's that green line there. That was Canadian National and Kansas City Southern. You got Union Pacific down there on the other side of the river. You got Burlington Northern Santa Fe across the river. You got Northern or Norfolk Southern. You got CSX, big hub of CSX down there. Railroads are big. New Orleans is a port town. So you got the ships coming and going from the north, from Latin America. You got the trains. I mean, uh, Steve Goodman wrote a song, City of New Orleans, and it's all about the train coming down from Chicago. That's an actual route, by the way. The famous song, Willie Nelson really made it into a hit. It's the City of New Orleans, fantastic song. But there's all kinds of songs about trains in New Orleans. That's just the most famous. Here is the Huey P. Long truss. You can see the CSX going across there. And you see how low the roadway is there in comparison. Um, Here's a switching yard down below. And here are the more domesticated trains, the trains that get people around in the city of New Orleans, the trolley system. And this is the one on the left top is St. Charles. So you can see it's always covered by this canopy of live oak trees. Beautiful, just beautiful. And then they branch off into other streets as well and other boulevards as well. And you can see these tracks, they're just everywhere. They just randomly turn and you just have to be aware if you're walking or jogging or driving and trying to cross this boulevard. These trains, they don't slow down, man. You have to watch out for them. This bottom left is a train going across the causeway, that long causeway. And then this is something that if you go to New Orleans, be prepared. You're going to sit at a lot of train crossings and you're going to wait for a lot of trains to go by. They're everywhere. Um, Here is that city of New Orleans route I was telling you about that he wrote the song based on. Goes from Chicago down through Champaign, Urbana, down to Memphis, to Jackson, eventually to New Orleans. So that's the route that it takes. And these are all the stops in between. You can see I've included a map here. It's interesting. Not only does the river take you north in the direction of Chicago, not by Chicago, but in the direction of Chicago, but this train route does as well. It's railroad route. And we all know how the music migrated north. It started in New Orleans, made its way up to Memphis, and worked its way eventually to Chicago. That's how that happened. These trains and the river took the music, which started down here in the Delta blues, the rhythm and blues, the African American slave music, basically, made its way up the river, became rhythm and blues, eventually became, the white, they slapped a new name on it, rock and roll, and make it marketable, and eventually made it all the way to Chicago. And a lot of these blues musicians started off down here, ended up there. And That's how these things migrate. This is the airport. As you can see, it's an international airport. You can see the river in the background. These planes, where we were staying in the KOA, as I said, it was right near it. These planes are constantly taking off and landing. And if you take Jefferson Highway, or actually Airline Highway, which runs right in front of it, Jefferson runs parallel to Airline for a period of time. So if you just go one street over to Airline and you're going past the landing strip, those planes, it feels like you could reach out and touch them as they cross the interstate, land right on the other side of the interstate on that landing strip. They're not that high. You feel like you could definitely throw a rock and hit one. And so anyway, that's the airport. Now, what one of the things culturally New Orleans is known for is music. And I've mentioned it. And of course, it's the home to Fats Domino, pictured upper left. And you listen to Fats Domino talk about, they ask, well, what did you call your music? He said, we called it rhythm and blues. And other people called it rock and roll, or, whatever name you want to slap. He said it was all the same music. And, but it came out of New Orleans. This is where you think about the cotton, the king cotton, the big crop that's coming out of all these plantations. It all ended up in New Orleans as it made its way out to sea, out to market. And so you figure wherever all this cotton is coming from is going to eventually bring with it its culture, its music. And it came to New Orleans. And, and so then New Orleans becomes home to all of this music. Louis Armstrong was jazz. You've got um, the Zydeco, the gospel, all these New Orleans. Dr. John is the Zydeco there on the bottom right. Zydeco is a cool rendition of New Orleans music, kind of a goulash and mixed together all these different influences, creates this new brand of music called Zydeco. And the gospel singer, the famous gospel singer, I forget her name right now. I want to say Fannie Lou Hamer. It's not Fannie Lou Hamer. She was a civil rights worker, but very famous. Can't think of the name. Apologize. But anyway, you can't go anywhere in New Orleans without hearing these guys aren't alive anymore, but their influence. We were down in the French Quarter the last Sunday before we left, and we stopped at a little cafe and got a beignet. And there was a little band there playing Fats Domino music. So you had a piano player, you know. Uh, Interestingly, Fats Domino played piano his way. He's from New Orleans. And then he had Ray Charles, who played piano his way. And he had Jerry Lee Lewis, who played piano his way. He sort of uh, became one of the fathers of rock and roll. He's up in Memphis. And so you had there was these interesting different ways to play the piano. All of it seemed new at the time because it was new. They had their own particular spin, but they're all basically playing the same rock and roll kind of music. They just did it differently. Um, Fats Domino used a lot of chording. Jerry Lee Lewis used his left hand to create a bass, and he played something completely different with his right hand, which is phenomenal to think about. And of course, Ray Charles was blind and had to play by ear, but they're all playing the same. It's all coming out about the same time. It's all coming from New Orleans up through Memphis and Chicago, taking the country by storm. So the music influence of New Orleans is tremendous. I I would recommend a trip to New Orleans. And listen, you're going to have to spend several days to see. I mean, we were here a month and we didn't see everything, not even close. And we were out there constantly trying to. So it's just a very culturally diverse city. There are some parts of probably not family friendly, given times of the night, like French Quarter. Just got to know that in advance. There's history here, Civil War history. Uh, there's history with related to different races, ethnic groups. As I said, the Creoles, the Cajuns, the food. I mean, the cuisine, the music. um, the water issues. I mean, it's a very old city. That's the other thing. It's very old. And boy, I know it's not old compared to some of the European cities, but in America, this is an old city. And you go into French Quarter, you see what I mean. Pretty sure there's no zoning rules in the city in French Quarter that apply to all these businesses and things. So hope you enjoyed that. It was just some additions or addendums to the JFK sites that we go on our tour. And, yeah, I thought they'd be interesting for those who might someday want to come to New Orleans for their own visit. And if you do, let me know, and I'd be happy to give you a guided tour um, of all the JFK related sites so you can see for yourself the influence, the impact the city of New Orleans had on the assassination. All the players. And when I say all the players, I'm talking about the five conspirators that uh, I have named had in some manner, shape, form, or connection to New Orleans. And of course, the patsy was sheep dipped that entire summer leading up to the fall of 63 in New Orleans. And the only trial in the JFK case, as far as criminal trial is concerned, happened in New Orleans, Jim Garrison. And so, and then The Godfather, the Carlos Marcel and his impact. My goodness. I can go on. I better stop. All right. Until next time, God bless. Thank you.